In the decades before Hurricane Katrina, storm after storm, hurricane after hurricane came toward New Orleans, but they all turned away.
The track has shifted, making New Orleans dead center.
Once the forecast shifted over to aim at New Orleans, Katrina took that track. The question was, how bad was it going to be?
A lot of people, had the attitude, they've gone through other hurricanes, so it's very expensive. A lot of people didn't evacuate.
I do remember going to bed on a Saturday night when Katrina was a Category 3 and waking up the next morning several hours later and it was a Category 5.
I was here for 27 years before Katrina, and it was always, okay, the danger, it's gonna miss us. So we kind of got complacent.
Woke up the day after the storm, we looked outside, the sun was shining. And then lo and behold, I looked out the window and it looked like a pool of water just coming down Tulane Avenue.
Well, the thing that we didn't expect was the actual levees breaking. And then the water just kept coming, and then it kept rising.
Well, before Katrina, none of that existed. It was just a wide open canal. The lake had free flow into the canals, and that's what happened during Hurricane Katrina. The storm came up just a little bit to the east of the city. It was spinning that counterclockwise, but a lot of the water from the lakefront pushed it up these canals. There was nowhere for it else to go, but we had the catastrophic failures in the flooding of the city at the outfall canal.
Every natural disaster has a human story. And that is the key. That is the takeaway and the perspective from Hurricane Katrina.
In this business, there are moments you never forget.
Yeah.
And that morning, that Monday morning, about 7:45 Central, 8:45 Eastern Time, the bulletin came in that the flood wall had failed here in the lower 9th Ward, and the industrial canal was pouring in. And that was the first evidence that I had and we had in the weather center that New Orleans was in big trouble. Up to that moment, we had thought that things were going to be okay here.
Yeah.
Even though it turns out there was flooding, we know now already.
We knew Mississippi had been ravaged already, and then New Orleans and these walls failed because of the pressure of the water.
We had no idea what was going to be the result of the levees breaking, the actual force of Katrina. I mean, it totally destroyed our city. It flooded the city to a capacity that had never been seen before. This is basically the greatest natural disaster in the history of the United States.
New Orleans was reasonably well prepared. They had an evacuation plan, but the problem was that they had Hurricane Ivan the year before. They evacuated and they ended up not needing to, so they were very reluctant to pull that string.
It was apocalyptic. It was like being on another planet. When I first got back into New Orleans, it was about a week after Katrina, and I went to check on my house and on a friend's house, and I remember there were no birds, there was no sound of nature. You could hear only the periodic helicopter flying over, no traffic, no people. There were packs of dogs, starving dogs, roaming around the neighborhoods. I saw a dead dog. I saw the wreckage of a helicopter on the banks of Bayou St. John. So it was very quiet, had an odor. There was kind of a crustiness to the ground, to the vegetation. A lot of the vegetation was dead, a lot of the trees were dead. And then a flood line everywhere, and X's spray painted on the front of homes indicating they'd been searched by the National Guard for bodies.
Looking back at the flooding in New Orleans, the lower 9th Ward and the levee breach there was so intense and so immediate that I think that historically is where people really think about when you consider what occurred as far as these breaches. 17th Street Canal, the lower 9th Ward, all of that inundating so many neighborhoods, and the pictures of people that had to move to their roofs with signs to try and be rescued will never leave anyone that was not only on the ground for Katrina, but watching all of this unfold around the world.
Now, we did hear about the breaches, so we knew water was coming in to Orleans Parish somewhere. We had failures on all three of the major outflow canals, and there were sections of Orleans Parish that were under 10, 12 feet of water. It was up to rooftops, and those poor people, and a lot of people were in one-story homes. They drowned. They drowned.
We want the whole world to know what the average New Orleanian had to see when they got home from their flood-imposed exile. They came home to something that looked exactly like this. Mold growing up the walls. Furniture toppled over. You know, the ceilings caved in. The damage that the water does is almost indescribable.
The Superdome. Everybody saw the iconic shot of the Superdome's roof being ripped off, and water was coming down into the dome.
The Superdome was meant to be a place where people that didn't have the ability to evacuate could find safe shelter.
It was supposed to be. And it was until the roof started peeling off. The roof should not have come off the Superdome. The winds in New Orleans were not that strong.
No.
There were some hurricane force winds, but I mean just barely. It was on the weak side of the storm. That roof should have survived, and that's why the emergency managers had that in mind, that this would be a last resort place for people to go. But when that roof started coming off, I mean, all of us that were watching thought, yeah, oh my God.
During the interview, a police officer tapped me on my shoulder, and I mean, I had the whole world looking at me. I mean, they had cameras from all over the world. And I turned around and said, "Officer, do you see what's going on?" He said, "Chief, Paul just committed suicide." Like my public information officer, he left his wife at home. And his neighbor contacted him and told him that his house was underwater and his wife was dead. And people saw me crying and they didn't know why I cried.
We have many of our police functions up and running. We have patrol patterns going in place in different areas of our city. Military and police personnel are being deployed. We have individuals who are still in the search and rescue operation mode. We still have thousands of individuals that have to be rescued.
Well, you know, it was like a regular day. We thought that, we would have a regular hurricane where we took regular precautions. It was a little ominous because it was kind of overcast like it is right now, And then we got the news about Hurricane Katrina. We went into hurricane preparation mode.
We knew that there was a large pool of very warm water in the Gulf of Mexico. We didn't know, though, if Katrina was going to go over it or just miss it. It wasn't obvious initially until the storm got into the Gulf and the track took it directly over that supercharged reservoir of energy.
Well, it looks like the track has shifted slightly, ever so slightly, to the west, making the pit stop on New Orleans dead center. As well, it looks like the timeline has changed a little bit. Looks like this is going to be maybe a 4 a.m., a 5 a.m. event.
I was here for 27 years before Katrina, and it was always, okay, the danger, it's going to miss us. So we kind of got complacent, except the night Katrina was coming. Thankfully, the National Weather Service put out a bulletin that said neighborhoods, and think about this, they never would tell you this unless they meant it. Neighborhoods will be uninhabitable for days, weeks, perhaps months.
We evacuated people to the best of our ability, but a lot of people, had the attitude, they've gone through other hurricanes, so it's very expensive, it's kind of inconvenient, so a lot of people didn't evacuate. We went throughout the neighborhoods, we got our police commanders together to evacuate as many people as humanly possible. They opened up the Superdome as a place where people could, hunker down. All of the regular shelters around the city, people were hunkering down there. People were going out of town, leaving, to come back after the hurricane had finished. So, it was like the normal protocol that we had in place. We had a pretty good system in place.
Sign of progress at the Louisiana Superdome. You can see people moving and moving much quicker than they were hours ago when they were stacked up and lined up on the ground.
It was just a matter of hours that this storm went from a Category 3, 125 mile per hour sustained winds, to 170 mile per hour sustained winds in just a matter of hours. That was textbook rapid intensification, and I think it was historic, certainly for that year.
Winds was something that we knew was serious when the Superdome started to take damage to the roof, and the actual magnitude and the devastation that the winds caused said it's not going to be like a normal hurricane.
The situation at the Superdome and the Convention Center was a humanitarian crisis like America had not seen before. I mean, if I hearken back to those moments, to see people's faces and the anguish was abysmal.
Well, the thing that we didn't expect was the actual levees breaking. And that morning when we came out and we saw water coming on Poydras Street, and Poydras Street is not a street that normally floods. And then once the levees broke, then the regular low-lying areas like where we're standing here, instead of a couple of feet of water, it started taking on 6 to 8 feet. The water just kept coming, and then it kept rising. And then we realized that this is not gonna be an easy fix. We're not gonna be able to recover quickly because the roads will start to take water. And when you can't use the roadways and people are trapped in their homes, that causes a problem.
Yeah, roadways were unbelievably compromised. It didn't matter where you were. It wasn't just New Orleans, it was outside of New Orleans as well.
Seeing people who thought they had shelter in the Superdome, thought they had food in the Superdome, and now seeing them just trying to save themselves along the highways that were above the waterline.
People had to go to the roofs, so then we had to get into rescue mode. So we didn't actually have a fleet of boats. They said, Chief, why don't we commandeer some of these private boats and we start our own rescue missions before we even got help from outside. And I think we saved hundreds of lives. Well, in the lower ninth ward, this area where I'm standing, in fact, my best friend's dad had a drugstore here, H&W drugstore. It was basically one of the most prominent economic areas in this entire lower ninth ward because it was not just a drugstore, it was a grocery store. They had other businesses set up here. So it was a situation where this is near and dear to my heart. I grew up coming to this place. I grew up working with Mr. Henry, and so when this place was totally immersed in water and totally destroyed, it brought it to a real place for me. I mean, I had been here when it was vibrant. I had been here where this was historical, where African-American communities was thriving, and now it was totally destroyed.
Yeah, it was apocalyptic. It was like being on another planet. There was no sound of nature. You could hear only the periodic helicopter flying over. My name is James Karst, and I am Communications Director at the Coalition to Restore Coastal Louisiana. I was on vacation at the time, and my vacation was supposed to conclude around the time that the storm hit. Of course, could not fly back into New Orleans, could not drive back into New Orleans, had to go to Baton Rouge instead. My job had relocated there, my job with the Times-Picayune newspaper.
The night Katrina was coming, thankfully the National Weather Service put out a bulletin that said neighborhoods will be uninhabitable for days, weeks, perhaps months.
It was apocalyptic. It was like being on another planet. When I first got back into New Orleans, it was about a week after Katrina, and I went to check on my house and on a friend's house, and I remember there were no birds, there was no sound of nature. You could hear only the periodic helicopter flying over, no traffic, no people. There were packs of dogs, starving dogs, roaming around the neighborhoods.
A cubic yard of water weighs 1,700 pounds. It comes in like a bulldozer. And so that's why a lot of those houses were just not there. A lot of the structures were just totally gone from the storm surge.
It was very quiet, had an odor. There was kind of a crustiness to the ground, to the vegetation. A lot of the vegetation was dead, a lot of the trees were dead, and then a flood line everywhere, and you know, X's spray painted on the front of homes indicating they'd been searched by the National Guard for bodies.
The flooding in this home went up to about the top of the door frame, as you see.
And had to go to work with only bathing suits and Hawaiian shirts, and then begin immediately editing stories about one of the greatest tragedies that I've ever experienced. I had a lot of colleagues who were traumatized by what they had seen, what they had experienced, evacuating in the back of a work truck. And, you know, we had makeshift offices, you know, not normal work circumstances. It was a really disorienting time, but a time when we really came together and, you know, and covered the story, even as we were part of the story. That newspaper did great work during that time. We were all very proud of it, even as we were trying to put our lives back together. You know, it was just kind of automatic. You know, this is what we did. We had to do the work. There was an international media spotlight on New Orleans, on South Louisiana. I have to say, a lot of that media from elsewhere was getting it wrong. And in fact, that's one of the stories that was specifically mentioned in the Pulitzer Prize Awards. I remember a story debunking the myths that there had been rampant violent crimes at the Superdome and the Convention Center. And yeah, we debunked that. That became an important news story. One of the really interesting things to me was the inability of FEMA to get here at a time when they were really needed, when water was needed, when food was needed. The inability, I think, in general, of government agencies to provide immediate help. And I always remember that Harry Connick Jr. got a truckload of bottled water into New Orleans before FEMA did. And that is something I'll never forget. But it really struck me that people kind of came together and helped themselves when they realized there was nobody else coming to help them. So we saw a lot of neighbors helping neighbors. A lot of people became heroes that you wouldn't expect to be heroes.
Off of Louisiana and Mississippi, there are these islands. So when the storm surge comes in, if the storm surge is not extraordinarily high, the islands will provide something of a buffer. In this case, the storm surge was way more than the islands could take, and it washed a good part of the islands away. There's been a lot of discussion about what to do about that, and now there's a plan in the works to finally rebuild that extra protection offshore.
After Hurricane Katrina, our state created a state agency, the Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority, that is charged with restoring and protecting wetlands. That has helped us improve that natural hurricane protection. A lot of people think of floodgates, they think of drainage canals, that sort of thing, but there's more than that. That's not enough to protect us. And that's something that we saw in Katrina when those drainage systems, canals failed. That was really our problem.
The Army Corps of Engineers and the state of Louisiana are continually trying to build up the land on the coastline from the erosion from Katrina and other storms that have followed. And look, it's billions of dollars, and it's a fight for cash, it's a fight for time, it's a fight to shore up the land and stop that erosion and build it up, because if they do not have success in that, years ahead, we're going to have major issues, and the possibility of even, New Orleans not being able to be saved. Because
we need to focus beyond those levees, beyond the internal flood protections like that, and work to restore the wetlands that are important to us as well. Our city has changed. It's different demographically from what it used to be before Katrina. A lot of people left, evacuated for the storm, and never came back.
Katrina transcends more than just a weather story. It's one of the biggest news stories of our lifetime, and will historically be remembered forever in the world of not only forecasting, but natural disasters.